Hi, I'm Katie, and this is the 15th episode of Ornamentations, which will be a feast of finishes. As you can see, I have quite a pile here, both cross-stitch and surface embroidery, which we'll be looking at. I have an exciting announcement to share with you today, some history, and the giveaway winner from the last episode. There's a ton to talk about today, so let's just dive in. And I'll start with some of the pieces that you've seen before but have progressed since I saw you last. The first of which is my FFO of Brenda Gervais' Merry Old Soul. And this is the chart. So I worked this on a fox and rabbit. I can't remember the name of the linen. I will put it in the description along with my threads used. And I made this as a companion piece to Peppermint Pals. And if you've been following my Flosstubes closely, you might be thinking, wait, didn't Peppermint Pals have the peppermint trim on it? Yes, it did. That one actually belongs to my mom and is on display at the attic presently with my Simple Harmony box. But I loved Peppermint Pals so much that I actually made two of them, and I finished mine with this beautiful red beaded trim to match Merry Old Soul so that they're companion pieces, although this is a pillow for display. And this guy has been finished as a hanging ornament ready for the tree. So I showed this to you in I think episode 11, which was Stitchy Plans, at which point it had actually been finished as an ornament. What I've done since then is I've just added this lovely sparkly trim. If you're new to my channel and interested in making something like this is my beaded spiral rope stitch tutorial, which you can find on my tutorials playlist. So that's the first one. And then another one that has progressed but isn't yet qualified as fully finished is Brenda Gervais' Burr, It's Cold Outside. And this guy has now been finished as a pillow. I love these. I've got some lovely matching silk satin on the back. Pretty good color match, I think. And it is just waiting for its trim, which is waiting on beads that are presently on back order. So once I get this guy fully trimmed out, I will show it to you. Again, you'll probably be sick of it by then, but I do really love this stitch and all of the fun sparkles. So you'll see it again once it's officially FFO'd. And then the next one, which I have, is my finish of Lottie Davies' A Merry Christmas Sampler. This was in progress the last time that I showed it to you, although I had gotten substantially through the finishing, and I have now finished it as a pillow. So the elements that I told you were twinging me, I ended up just taking them out because I had thought I would redo the colors. And as I looked at it, I thought, you know, I don't think it really needs anything else. And I had also asked you about the trim on this piece. What did you think? Would you like to see a red beaded trim like on this one? Or the little, oh, I still don't know what to call these, the red beaded picot loopy things seen on Brenda Sampler Stitcher, Brenda of Brenda and Laura's finish of Annie Morris, which I actually tested out on this piece, but I found that the beads I had didn't really work very well for it. Once I do manage to do that on a piece, I will share the details with you. But I also thought that given the strong red border on this piece, that it was actually kind of complete in itself, just as a plain pillow finish. So that's how I've left it. If I do really get going on the beaded picot loopy thing finished, I may revisit this. But for now, I do actually really like it just as is. What do you think? Does it need more, or does it look like an FFO to you? So those are ones that we have all seen before in varying states of progress. And then I have two unexpected and totally new finishes, which were stitched in the time period between my last episode and now. I had more time to cross stitch than I thought because I had rather a bad fall and I was laid up for about a week. I'm fine now. It was just a sprain, but I was not really moving very much or very well. And I couldn't sit at my stand and stitch as I usually do, so I was just laid up in bed cross stitching. And honestly, for a couple of days, not even cross stitching, just kind of laying in bed with a heating bed staring at the ceiling. I can't tell you how unusual that is for me. I am always stitching. If I have 15 minutes, I'm sitting down and I'm putting a couple of stitches in a project. I am working on a little beaded trim. I'm always doing something. So a couple of days with no stitching at all is such a rare thing. But that was what happened. And so I was able to, once I did get back to stitching, I was able to get through and knock out pretty quickly two little Brenda Gervais smalls as part of my Christmas series. If you're new to my channel, as I discussed in episode 11, Stitchy Plans, I am trying to put in just a little bit of stitching on a Christmas piece every day so that when Christmas comes around next year, I have lots and lots of new decorations because Christmas is my favorite holiday. But when you're stuck in bed and you have more time, you can get through actually quite a lot. So this is Souvenirs of the Heart, Home for Christmas, which Brenda Gervais stitched one over one on, I think this is 28 count mushroom Lugana. I didn't really like the look of the coarser fabric, so I just decided to stitch one thread over two on one of my favorite linens, also used here on Lottie Davies Merry Christmas Legacy Linen 37 count Russian tea cake. So this has been finished, but it doesn't have trim applied yet. I am still thinking about that, and any suggestions as to what you think this would need to finish it off would be very welcome. So this is going to be a hanging ornament. As you can see, it's on the beautiful Legacy Linen Wild Honey. Oh, that's actually a better color representation there. Good job, camera. And then again, I have backed it with a coordinating silk satin, which is one of my favorite backing fabrics for finishes. It's tough, but it's flexible, and also it's shiny and beautiful. Therefore, I love it. So as with all of my stitches today, I will put my threads used in the description below because they are my own work. And as usual, I've done my trick of using Accentuate blended, in this case, with Soie Gobelins to give a little bit of sparkle here. That's the white. And then I've accented with some lovely 2mm Siam crystal rounds. Didn't really make many changes to this other than I left off this satin stitch stripe here, not because I don't like satin stitch, I actually do a great deal, but I had left that until last thinking that I might want to change it from white. And as I was looking at the complete piece, I thought that it didn't really need anything more, that it was okay just as it was. So I left it, and I'm pretty happy with the results. These are my threads. Most of my threads actually. I've left the... I've been using the Accentuate so much that it's in multiple project boxes at this point. So I've got here a mixture of Gobelins 103 and then the lovely sparkly Accentuate. And then with an eye to the specialty thread tutorial, I also tried cross stitching with another filament silk that I use frequently in my surface embroidery, but I haven't cross stitched before. This is called Soie de Paris or Paris. Sorry, I don't speak French, so I'm going to mangle pronunciations pretty regularly. And this is a 6-stranded filament silk floss with a lower twist. It's closer to décolleté than anything else, although it is a filament silk like Gobelins. These are the two together. So I have been cross stitching with a few different threads with the idea that when I bring you my specialty thread tutorial, I can show you these things in action. I wasn't sure how I would like cross stitching with Paris, but I do. The lower twist makes for a slightly different look, but it does cross stitch beautifully in my opinion. So we'll take a very close look at how the different threads look in these stitches in the tutorial, but I do like the results. So that is Souvenirs of the Heart, Home for Christmas, and you can really see there how much the different ground affects the feel of the piece. I do love this combination of that peachy pinky ground, the white, the red, the green. The pink just gives a little something extra to the more expected Christmas palette. So I am pretty pleased with how that turned out. And when I finished this, I was still laid up in bed. So I turned to yet another Brenda Gervais small, which I don't have a cover photo for because this was one of her freebies. You can get it on her Facebook group, and it's called Merry and Minty. Again, this has been finished but doesn't yet have the trim. I'm thinking that I might try little red beaded loops on this one, but again, let me know what you think. And you might be able to see there's a little bit poking out here. That is the ribbon. This is intended to be an ornament, but I screwed up when I stitched this together. The ribbon got caught in the side seam, and so I had to cut it out, but I was too lazy to cut the whole thing apart. So my thought is that I'll just drop a hanger in right before I attach the trim and then use that to cover up any messiness at the attachment of the hanging points. This one is largely Soie Gobelins. There's the Accentuate and Soie 103. I used red Accentuate blended with Soie Surfing for the red on the candy canes, but again, this really doesn't pick up on camera. And then I used little 2mm crystal rounds in place of the French knots that Brenda Gervais used for this string of lights. And as with Home for Christmas, I did end up ditching the borders. There's supposed to be a candy cane stripe border here, here, and at the top, but I did like the more compressed look. Having ornaments of different sizes is wonderful in filling out a tree, so I liked this guy a little smaller and a little more plain. So he's worked with Gobelins, Accentuate 103, and a little bit of Soie Gobelins. I'll put the exact colors in the description below, which I think I said already. But this is my stitch of Merry and Minty, which I think turned out pretty well, considering that I was so tired I could barely count when I was stitching this. I did definitely make a few mistakes, but thankfully Christmas ornaments are very, very forgiving. And so really what you see is the sparkle, the fun colors, and then I think once I have this trimmed out and hanging on the tree, none of the little mistakes will be visible at all. One note about how I finish, I keep meaning to discuss this with you and forgetting. what I stuff with. I do not use walnut shells or wood chips or shavings or sawdust. Oh boy, sawdust. I stuff with 100% wool roving. This is one that you can buy on Amazon, or you can get larger balls of wool roving, much more reasonably priced, from Dharma Trading Company. I'll link all of this in the description. And wool roving is, in my opinion, the best, bar none, for any kind of stuffed finish. Wool roving has more resistance and more control, and it gives you these really firm yet controlled finishes that I think are just beautiful. It's a lot easier to wrestle with than polyfill. It is more expensive, but I don't think you can argue with the results. And the way you use it is just like polyfill. You fluff this stuff up and stuff with it. So that's my pitch for wool roving and finishing. I love it. I don't see it mentioned much on Flosstube, which is one reason why I wanted to bring it up. And then my last finish, oh no, actually I do have another cross stitch finish before we move on to surface embroidery, but I didn't actually stitch this myself. I wanted to share one of my mom's finishes with you today because it was so much fun. This is her adaptation of Brenda Gervais' Queen of Autumn, which she stitched in the past exactly as called for. She puts it out at Thanksgiving, but she adapted the pattern herself to suit a particular interest of hers. So do you know the New York Times spelling bee game? There are 7 letters. You have to use the letter in the center to make as many words as you can, and then you reach different levels in the game: amazing, genius, and if you get every single possible word with the combination of letters, you are anointed queen bee. And my mom is very good at word games, much better than I am, so she has made it her mission in life to be queen bee on the spelling bee game every single day, which she does. And so she made a cross stitch to commemorate her accomplishment, which I have to commend her for. I could not be queen bee on the spelling bee game all the time. I've played it a few times with her, and I've got an esoteric vocabulary, so I do sometimes know very odd words, but oh, she just kills me at it. She's a lot better. So she took the crowned figure from Queen of Autumn, surrounded her with bee skips, flowers, Queen Bee, which is her official title now, and then a cross-stitched representation of the spelling bee game, which you'll be familiar with if you've played it yourself. And then of course more spring-like colors here filling out the apron instead of the pumpkin here. The bee skips she did get from another chart, but I can't actually remember which one it was. And then she likes flat hanging finishes for her seasonal displays. So this is just over Bristol. She stitched felt over the back to cover it neatly, hand stitched it down, and then she's got a little twine as the hanger here. And this hangs in her kitchen. I thought that this was a really fun, imaginative finish, and I wanted to share it with you all. It's a pretty easy adaptation from a pattern. So, well done, Mom. I loved it, and I just had to share that with you because I thought it was really fun. And then we'll get back to my own finishes, and these are now on surface embroidery, and they are the Marie Antoinette smalls. So to recap the idea of this project a little bit, I want to have a beautiful stay-at-home sewing box. I did expound on this at more length in episode 11 if you missed it, Stitchy Plans. And I want to fill it with smalls that are kind of vaguely inspired by Sofia Coppola's film Marie Antoinette, the beautiful colors, the light feel of the film, and the mix of modern and 18th century influences. So my first piece, which I showed you in progress a couple episodes ago, was stitching the bottom band from Hands Across the Sea, Jane Marshall, as a pin keep, and finishing it off with this wonderful shot silk from Nude. The color is called Waterfall, and I'll link it in the description below, although silk does have some drawbacks, which we'll get to in a minute. So when I showed this to you last, the pin cushion was finished, but it was missing its trim, which it now has. I gave this fabulous crystal beaded trim in a lovely pink, and to me it looks like a beautiful frosted little cake is what the trim reminds me of the piped icing on the edge of a professional cake. And so the trim was actually kind of an interesting journey here. There's actually a line from the film. She looks like a little piece of cake. They're describing Marie Antoinette early on, and that's what I think of when I look at this piece and the fabulous decadent little edge. So this is actually a slightly different variation on the trim than what I've shown you before. I have used a 2mm round as my center bead. I previously hadn't gone smaller than 3mm, which was actually what I started with. This is my more usual 3mm bicone. The color is light rose, and I originally had this on the pin cushion, but it's larger. I'm not sure if you can, yeah, that's a better, it's much thicker, and it just looked out of scale with the piece to me. These are, by the way, the same crystal colors. It's just the 2mm and the 3mm are a little different in tone. So this is the beautiful, beautiful, gorgeous 3mm light rose trim, which I have kept because how can you not use this? This has to go on something. I just don't know what yet. But it wasn't right for this piece, so I took it off and I went to the smaller 2mm trim. I will put links to what I used, although one of the things you'll have to find a substitute for, because the closest modern color I could get is this silver lined pink, which is very bright, and the silver gives it this really bold tone. The silver lining, sorry, gives it this really bold tone that I wasn't loving on the trim. So I used it as the center bead in the trim, sorry, as the, yeah, I think I say, I'm gonna have to, oh gosh, I can't even remember my terminology. I'm sorry, it's the leg in the fall and general craziness with life. But so my side beads, where I would normally put a modern size 15-0 seed bead, I've used a very tiny antique bead from my stash. These are no longer available, so my suggestion, if you wanted to follow me on this stitch, would actually be to use this color, which is 556. I'll put the details in the description below, and use a 15 for the side beads, size 11 in the same color for the center bead, and then the 2mm light rose crystals. I will also put down how many I used. So this is my pin cushion, aka a little piece of cake, which is the first FFO of the Marie Antoinette smalls that will go in my box. I actually just found the box itself. It's on order. I'm hoping it will be here by the time I see you next, and that I'll be able to share it with you. And then my last finish that I have to share with you today is the scissors keep, which when I showed this to you before was basically just the silk with a little bit of stitching on it, but it is now FFO'd, and this is it. To revisit, this is my original design, which we discussed a couple episodes ago, and I showed you the color options I was thinking about, which were yellow, darker pinks, or lighter pinks. As you can probably see, I did end up going with the lighter pinks, but I did really appreciate all of your feedback, which gave me much food for thought. I'm just gonna put a couple things away before I start knocking things over. I don't think I've dropped anything yet this episode. That's gotta be a record. So this is my finish. As you can see, I've got the lighter pinks here, and then I've filled it out with sequins, with some crystals. Sorry, there we go. And then Soie Gobelins in herringbone stitch, in fishbone stitch, and then I have accented the center line by over stitching with laced back stitch in a thicker thread called Soie Perlée. I'll show you my threads in a minute, and then we'll talk more about the details on this. It holds a little pair of scissors, and then the lining is this little tiny glimpse of shocking pink, which is a tiny detail that I really like. So these are the final materials that were used. Hope I'm not gonna drop. So I've got crystals in different shades. I've got sequins, same color, 2 different sizes, silk wrapped pearl, and then the lighter green threads from the ones that I showed you when I first discussed this project. I did have a very specific reason for using these particular greens, which we'll talk about next time. And then I ultimately settled on the lighter pinks. There were some very passionate arguments made for the darker pinks, which I have to tell you, I felt much the same way about it. And if I hadn't committed to the lighter greens here, I probably would have gone that direction. But ultimately, I felt that the lighter pinks were more in tone with not just the lighter greens, but the other piece here. Although, as you can see, just due to the brightness of the silk and the way it reflects light, this is a much bolder piece where this has more middle values. But they're both beautiful, and I think they can live together in a box without looking like they're completely mismatched. So one of the big changes that I made here from my original plan was that my original design had sprays radiating out from the center flower. I think you can see that. And I did actually draw those in, which I heartily regretted once I was pretty close to finish and realized that I just didn't have the threads or the right stitch to make the spray in the way that I had envisioned, which was very influenced by fashion. So my inspiration here weren't just Marie Antoinette, the historical person, and 18th century French art, design, and fashion, but some contemporary influences as well. There's a lot of really wonderful beading and embroidery work done on modern couture fashion. This is a photo of a recent dress. This one I think is Elisab. And they've got these beautiful, elaborate, sparkly sprays. And that was my mental picture for the sprays on this piece. But when push came to shove, I didn't have what I needed. Scale was an issue here. I could not get this kind of look on a piece of this scale with the color restrictions I had set myself. So instead I filled out with more of the florets, with more of the sequin sprays, and then I tried to just kind of bring it all together. So when I talk about why I don't draw in the entire design, here, the pencil marks are my full design. The pen marks are what I actually drew on the fabric. This is why. It's because my ideas frequently change as I'm stitching, as I realize what is and is not possible with the materials that I have and how they're working together. And I don't like to box myself in by having more marks on my fabric that I have to cover than I possibly have to. Obviously, you have to have something so that you know where to stitch, but I like to keep it as freeform as possible. The other fun thing here, I think, are the centers of the flowers, which are these fabulous silk wrapped pearls, which are a little coil of silk wrapped wire, and they can be used in a lot of really fun and interesting ways. I've accented them here with crystals, and that I thought helped bring the greens together and kind of marry this into a cohesive whole. So this wasn't entirely what I had planned when I set out, but I'm still pretty pleased with the finish, and I hope that you like it too. So, oh, the other thing I was going to mention was that this one did have some difficulties in finishing because of the thinness of the fabric. I wouldn't necessarily recommend stitching on this to anyone else unless you were going to be able to do a glued finish, because this silk, while beautiful, is paper thin, and even under full tension, it does not really like the abuse that it got with all of the heavy stitching here. So when I unlaced it, there was some warping and distortion, so I corrected that by lacing my embroidery over a Bristol frame on both sides so that I could get a nice smooth finish with the silk here. However, the rigidity of the scissors keep here, which is caused by the Bristol that I've laced the fabric over, meant that it threw off my sizing. So I had initially planned this to have my scissors sit a little lower in the keep, but because it fits a little different with the keep being so rigid, they do poke out. But I think all in all, quite a success and a good start to my Marie Antoinette smalls, which we'll keep showing as I keep moving through them, and I hope next time I will be able to show you the box that I will be putting them in. And now I am going to move on to my announcement, which I'm really excited about. So from March 19th to May 21st, I'll put all the details in the description. I have Finish, which has been finished for quite a while, but you haven't seen yet, going on display at the San Francisco School of Needlework and Design in a joint show with the wonderful Debbie Valabini of Debbie Atelier, and I'll link to her platforms because I find her work really exciting. She does very contemporary beaded pieces with sequins, and they're just dimensional and really cool. Please check her out. And my contribution to the show is a full-size beaded basket made with very, very tiny antique beads. I can't give you a full look at this today because it's been promised to the school as new work, but I am just going to flash this just a little bit so that you can see what the inducement is here to go and see the show. If you're in the Bay Area, I hope you'll get a chance to stop by. If not, I will show this on my Flosstube once I get it back, and what I would like to know from you today is what you would like to know about the basket and how much of a deep dive you want to do in it. Do you want to know about the process? Do you want to know about the construction? Do you want to know about my design and my inspiration? How much would you like to know about the materials that I used? So give me your feedback on what you'd like to see. It does help me plan, and it's very, very helpful to me. I can't tell you how much I value all of your comments and your wonderful feedback and your thoughts. So please keep it coming. And then with that, we will move on to the Simple Harmony box, or rather some history behind it. So as part of the Simple Harmony box, I have been doing more research into the Society of Friends, because I realized as I was stitching the Forget-Me-Not pattern, which is Modern Folk Embroidery's interpretation of a classic Quaker sampler, and reading Jacob's notes on his design, that I actually knew very little about the Society of Friends, who are a fascinating group. Most of what I knew about them actually came from Jacob's Flosstubes, where he shared some interesting information about the Quakers and their beliefs and their actions. So I've been doing some reading in addition to the Quaker Aesthetics book that I showed you in episode 7 when I showed you the box for the first time, and across a variety of sources, and we'll pick up this particular thread of history again. But one of the interesting things I learned was that in addition to the Quaker commitment to equality, gender equality, way ahead of its time, they had a commitment to education for women. And women were taught not just to read, but to write. Those were two separate disciplines at the time. You could theoretically read and not be able to write, whereas today those things would not be true. You're either literate or illiterate. And once Quaker women were adults, they actually had their own meetings as a society, and they kept meetings for those minutes, and those meetings have been invaluable sources of information both for researchers and for genealogists looking into Quaker ancestors. And it was also a critical source. They were frequent sources for an article I just read on some of the subtleties of Quaker dress. So plainness as a Quaker testimony has been much discussed, but what that meant in terms of real life and the lived experience of Quakers, both male and female, has been much debated, much discussed. In this article, which I will link in I'll put the details in the description, discusses that in detail, and several of the sources here are meeting minutes. I'm not sure if this is going to show up, but they are meetings, general meetings, minutes from male meetings, and minutes from the female meetings. And they're actual sources in this article, and a source for contemporary scholarship as well as genealogy. And you may be wondering why I'm going on and on about this, and it's actually about the box and a discussion I had recently with someone who's on the stitch along. So all of this information is critical in our understanding of these people, of the time in which they lived and the way that they lived. So if you are a reproduction sampler stitcher, you have probably come across a few samplers in your time where there might be a name on the sampler, or there could be initials, but it wasn't enough to identify the specific girl who stitched it. A name alone doesn't always provide enough context to trace the original. And this leads me to my point about the Simple Harmony box. And it's about recording your name and your story for posterity, because this is something I've learned about in studying 17th century historic caskets, that the girls who stitched them have largely been lost to history. If they recorded their names, they didn't do so on the box. With very rare exception, those names got separated from the objects that they made, and so most of them are anonymous works. And in stitching my own pieces, I have wanted my name to survive. Maybe that's just hubris, but it's also a reflection of how much time and how much of myself I have put into my pieces. So I always try to put somewhere on my big pieces something about not just me, my full name and the date, but something about the inspiration behind the piece itself. And I'm actually realizing as I say that I forgot to bring my example of that. So I'm gonna pause this and return to you in just 1 second. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I thought I had everything, but really I'm just a little flustered today. I'm running around. I'm actually filming this several days early, although it will be uploaded on my regular day, because I will be out of town on my regular filming day. I am traveling to teach at a small seminar, and it's my first time teaching since the pandemic actually, so it's been crazy trying to get everything together. But I did want to have my Flosstube with you. I have so many finishes to share, so this is early, and let's get back to boxes. We'll see if I can actually pick up my train of thought. Probably not. So this is the bottom drawer from my completed casket, which you haven't seen yet, and we'll get back to this when I do show it to you. But it's a good example of one way to record something of yourself and your inspiration on a piece in a way that it can't be removed from the box. So in the lining of this drawer is my name, the date of completion, and a quote from Marvell's poem, The Garden, which was the inspiration from this casket. And we'll talk more about the specifics of that when I get to actually showing you this piece. But I did want to show you one way that I left a record, not just of my name, but of my inspiration on a big project. I don't do this for everything, so my smalls are anonymous. There's no name, initials, date, whatever on any of that. But on a big project where I have just put so much of myself into it, so much time, so much love, so much care, I do want to make sure that my name survives and something about what led me to do this survives as well. And the funny thing is, actually, after going on and on about this, I haven't actually done it yet myself for Simple Harmony. I have been thinking about what form that will take. I know it will go on the bottom of the box, but I haven't done it yet myself. And when I get it back from the attic, I will be doing that and sharing with you how I chose to record a little something of myself on the Simple Harmony box. So if the idea appeals to you, which it doesn't have to, it's your box and you should do what you want with it. But if the idea does appeal to you, some ways to do that would be writing on paper and doing a paper lining, embroidering your name on the fabric interior. So you would do the embroidery before you glue it in. Or, of course, you can use the bottom of the box. You can write directly onto your decorative paper, or you can write something on another piece of paper and then glue that on with the yes space. There are so many things that you could do, and as the tutorials have been going up, I realized that I did not address this in them and wanted to mention it as something that you may want to think about in planning your own box as you move through the finishing, because we do have several people making wonderful progress on their stitches and they may be getting to finishing before long. So the most recent Simple Harmony tutorial to go up was on gluing your embroidery to backing paper. The next tutorial, which will be up next Thursday, will be the first one on gluing your embroidery to the box itself. We'll get a first look at that process, and then of course I'll be back with you in 2 weeks for my next Flosstube. But before I forget, I also have the giveaway winner from the last episode, which is the RSN guide to silk shading, and the winner of this is Cheryl Adams. Cheryl, I have commented on your comment. Please contact me and I will mail this out to you after I get back from my trip. So for the next time, I have some exciting announcements. I'll be showing you a little bit of what I've been up to, some progress updates on my stitching, and there will also be a new giveaway. Please take care of yourselves, have care for each other, and until I see you next, happy stitching.